Why did the radio go quiet when she spoke? Gunfire had been tearing through the channel just seconds earlier, shouted grid coordinates, panic compressed into static, men yelling for cover that wasn't there. Then one voice cut through everything, calm, steady, almost distant. Callahan, Northern Ridge, 3 threats neutralized. For 3 seconds, nobody answered. 3 seconds where seasoned Rangers and SEALs forgot how to breathe. Because the question hanging in the air wasn't tactical. It was human. Who is she? 48 hours earlier, Reese Callahan had been invisible. Just another staff sergeant stepping off a helicopter into Afghan dust. Another intelligence analyst with a laptop and a clearance badge. Another woman walking into a world that had already decided what she couldn't be. The mountains didn't care. The Hindu Kush rose the same way they always had, ancient, patient, unconcerned with rank or reputation. Reese adjusted the strap of her gear bag and walked forward anyway. Someone muttered desk jockey behind her. Another voice laughed. She didn't turn around. She had learned long ago that silence conserved energy. Master Chief Garrett Briggs met her near the operations center, scarred, heavyset, the kind of man whose confidence came from surviving things others hadn't. "You analyze," he told her flatly. "You don't play soldier." Reese nodded. She had heard versions of that sentence her entire career. But what Briggs didn't know, what no one there knew yet, was that Reese Callahan had been reading terrain since she was 14, standing beside her grandfather in the Montana cold, learning how wind bent bullets and patience kept people alive. He had taught her that the best hunters didn't chase. They waited. By midnight, Reese was still awake. While others slept, she dug through reports, after-action files, casualty lists, and slowly a pattern emerged. 3 missions, 3 warnings, 3 times analysts had flagged danger, and 3 times those warnings were ignored. People had died because someone didn't want to listen. Her chest tightened as one name kept appearing on the approval chain. Briggs. She didn't confront him immediately. She knew how that would go. Experience had taught her when to speak and when to wait. The briefing the next evening was crowded. Armed men, folded maps, certainty thick in the air. Briggs outlined the plan with confidence. Eastern Ridge, Overwatch, clean approach. Reese raised her hand. The room turned. When she spoke, she didn't argue, she explained. Wind shear, blind terrain, limestone caves invisible from satellite imagery. She watched disbelief ripple across faces. Briggs smiled, but not kindly. "Sit down," he told her. "Let the adults handle the kinetic work." Something broke quietly inside her then. Not anger. Resolve. That night, a sniper named Sullivan Barrett came to her door. His voice was low, careful. "You were right," he said. "And tomorrow, people are going to die if nobody's watching from the right angle." He told her about the Northern Ridge, a position no one used, a climb no one wanted. Reese didn't answer immediately. She thought about her grandfather's trembling hands, about promises made beside hospital beds, about shots no one expected. At 3:45, she made her choice. While helicopters lifted Briggs and his men into the dark, Reese slipped through the wire alone. The climb was slow, deliberate, stone biting into her gloves, wind rising exactly as she'd predicted. By the time dawn touched the valley, she was in position. And what she saw made her stomach drop. Caves. 6 of them. Weapons already manned. An ambush waiting to happen. She called it in. Briggs ordered her back. She closed her eyes. 30 seconds from now, someone's son would die. Reese Callahan broke orders. She didn't rush, she calculated wind, range, temperature, elevation. Her grandfather's voice settled her breathing. The best shot is the one nobody expects you to take. She fired. 3 threats dropped before the sound reached them. The radio exploded. "Who took that shot?" She answered calmly. The remaining fighters opened fire. Chaos erupted. Overwatch was blind. Men were pinned down. For the first time, Briggs hesitated. "Callahan," he said tightly, "engage." And she did. One by one, threats disappeared. Not heroics. Precision. When the high-value target tried to escape, Reese tracked him through unstable wind, extreme range, and doubt pressing hard against her ribs. The first shot missed by inches. She chambered another round. Thought about the lives already lost to that man. Held steady. The final shot ended everything. Afterward, there was no celebration in her chest, no triumph. Only weight. 9 lives taken, dozens saved. That night, Briggs stood in front of his team and said something he had never said before. "I was wrong." Not quietly. Not privately. He apologized. Recognition didn't erase the cost. Medals didn't lighten the memories. Acceptance didn't silence the echoes. Later, Reese sat on the roof, watching mountains fade into shadow. Barrett sat beside her. "Killing changes you," he said. She nodded. "But some shots," he continued, "are worth taking." Reese touched the worn leather journal in her pocket, her grandfather's handwriting pressed against her heart. She didn't feel like a legend. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had finally been seen. And as the stars rose over ancient ground soaked in history and regret, Reese Callahan understood something quiet and lasting. Sometimes strength doesn't announce itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't argue. Sometimes it simply acts. Why did she stay quiet when everyone else believed the plan was flawless? The room smelled like oil, metal, and unspoken certainty. Folding chairs scraped the concrete floor as operators settled in, confident, relaxed in that dangerous way that comes from repetition. Reese Callahan stood near the back wall, tablet pressed lightly against her chest, listening to men discuss life-and-death decisions as if the land itself had already agreed with them. She felt it again, that familiar tightening behind her ribs. Not fear. Recognition. She had seen this terrain before, not in person but in patterns, in shadow angles, in the way valleys funneled wind like a clenched fist, the kind of place that punished assumptions. Briggs pointed to the eastern ridge on the map, his voice calm, assured. "Overwatch here, clean sightlines, good elevation." He spoke like a man who had made this call a dozen times and survived every one of them. The room nodded along. Reese didn't. She watched the satellite image closely. Limestone formations, subtle folds in the terrain, shadows that didn't quite make sense unless you knew what to look for. Her fingers curled slightly around the tablet. She could stay quiet. She had learned how. Silence was safer. Silence kept you employed. Silence didn't get your motives questioned or your competence dissected. But silence also got people killed. She raised her hand. The change in the room was instant. Conversation stopped. Heads turned, some faces curious, others annoyed, a few openly hostile. Briggs didn't hide his irritation. "This is an operational briefing," he said. "Questions after." Reese's voice came out steady anyway. "Master Chief, with respect, there's an issue with the Overwatch position." You could feel the temperature drop. She stepped forward before doubt could pull her back, pulled the imagery onto the main screen. She didn't argue, didn't accuse, she explained. Wind shear patterns, thermal updrafts, crosswinds that would build just after dawn, limestone caves masked by terrain that satellites flattened into irrelevance. "This ridge looks perfect," she said quietly, "but it can't see everything." Someone laughed under their breath. Briggs smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "We've run ops here for years." And in the last 4 months, Reese said before she could stop herself, 3 warnings like this were ignored, and people died. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was anger. Briggs stepped closer, his voice low, controlled. He reminded her of her role, her place, the line she wasn't supposed to cross. When he told her to sit down and let the adults handle it, something fragile inside her finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. She sat. She said nothing else. But she watched. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Reese sat alone in the intelligence section long after the generators had settled into their steady hum. She reviewed weather data again, reran calculations she already knew were right, double-checked wind models that confirmed her fears. She wasn't anxious anymore. She was certain. The knock at her door came late, careful, deliberate. Sullivan Barrett didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. The rifle case slung over his shoulder said enough. "That took guts," he said quietly. "It took desperation," Reese replied. "People keep dying." Barrett nodded. "I was at Tangi Valley." That was all he had to say. He showed her his notebook, handwritten data, sketches of ridgelines, wind notes recorded over months. The northern ridge stood out immediately, overlooked, unmarked, dismissed. "Better wind shadow," he said. "Clear view of the caves nobody wants to talk about." Reese studied the page, heart pounding. Everything aligned: terrain, wind, angles. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because tomorrow morning," Barrett said, "I'll be stuck on the eastern ridge, watching nothing while my friends walk into hell." He hesitated at the door before leaving. "If things go wrong, I hope you're out there." Reese didn't sleep after that. She thought about Montana, about cold mornings and breath turning to fog, about her grandfather's voice steady behind her shoulder. Patience means survival. At 3:45 she dressed in silence, signed out a rifle under a perfectly legal excuse, packed light, efficient. The armorer didn't ask questions, just handed her the weapon and met her eyes. "Good hunting," he said. As the helicopters lifted off, Reese slipped through the wire alone. The climb was brutal, loose stone, thin air, the kind of ascent that punished hesitation. She moved with deliberate care, every step measured. Wind rose exactly on schedule. By the time she reached the ridge, dawn was bleeding into the sky. She crawled the last stretch, set up without haste, let the rifle become an extension of her breathing. Then she looked, and her blood ran cold. The caves were real, more than she'd predicted, weapons already positioned, men waiting. Below, the assault element moved in textbook formation, completely unaware. She keyed the radio. Briggs ordered her back. Her finger hovered over the transmit button. Court-martial flashed through her mind. Career-ending consequences. Years of discipline and restraint balanced against seconds of human life. She released the button without responding. The point man stepped closer to the kill zone. Reese adjusted her scope. Wind, range, elevation. Her breathing slowed. She squeezed. The first target fell. Then the second. Then the third. The radio erupted. "Who took that shot?" She answered. Silence followed, not relief but disbelief. Then the remaining fighters opened fire. The valley exploded with sound. Briggs demanded Overwatch support that couldn't see the threat. Reese could. "Authorize engagement," she said. This time he didn't argue. She moved through targets with grim efficiency. No emotion, no triumph, only responsibility. When the ambush collapsed, her hands remained steady, but her chest felt hollow. Then Barrett's voice came through, shaken. "We're alive." Reese exhaled for the first time in minutes. But the mission wasn't over. Movement at the compound, vehicles assembling, the high-value target trying to disappear into the mountains. Extreme range, shifting wind. She admitted uncertainty, then chose anyway. The first shot missed by inches. She chambered another round, thought about promises, about the faces of men she'd never meet, about the weight of every decision that led here. She waited for the wind to align, and fired. When the SUV crashed, Reese didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She simply reported. Afterward, as helicopters lifted survivors from the valley, she stayed on the ridge alone. She had saved lives. She had ended others. And she understood now what her grandfather had carried silently for decades. Skill didn't shield you from consequence. It only made the wait unavoidable. As the sun climbed higher, Reese Callahan lay still, staring through her scope at a world that would never look simple again, knowing that the hardest part of taking an unexpected shot wasn't pulling the trigger. It was living with the echo afterward. Why didn't victory feel like relief when the helicopters finally lifted off? The rotors thumped the air hard enough to rattle the loose stones around her position, but Reese Callahan didn't move. She stayed prone on the northern ridge, eyes still pressed to the scope, tracking the valley long after the assault element had cleared the kill zone. Her job wasn't finished just because the shooting had stopped. That was the lie people believed, that the hardest part was pulling the trigger, that once the last round was fired, everything softened, that adrenaline faded into relief. For Reese, the opposite happened. The silence was heavier than the gunfire. She cataloged the scene below with the same discipline that had carried her through the last hours. The compound secured, secondary teams moving methodically, no frantic radio calls, no medevac requests, no names being shouted in panic. 0 friendly casualties. That number echoed in her head, sharp and unreal. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out and left behind on the limestone. She had taken 9 lives. She knew the number precisely. Numbers mattered to her. They were honest in a way emotions never were. 9 men who would never see another sunrise. She had not known their names, had not seen their faces up close. That distance was a mercy, but it was also a lie. Somewhere far away, there would be mothers and children and empty spaces at dinner tables. Reese swallowed hard and forced herself to breathe. This was the part nobody trained you for. The radio crackled again. Briggs' voice came through, stripped of its earlier certainty. Callahan, maintain overwatch until exfil. Copy, she replied. Just one word, calm, professional, contained. Inside, something shifted. She had heard that tone before, not from commanders, but from men who had just realized the world wasn't built the way they thought it was. Men forced to confront their own blind spots. She scanned the ridgelines one last time. Nothing moved. No hidden threats. No delayed second wave. The ambush had been real, and it had been dismantled before it could claim anyone. When she finally rose from her position, her legs trembled. Not from fear, not from exhaustion alone, but from the delayed cost of focus finally letting go. The descent was slower than the climb. Every step jarred muscles she hadn't felt during the fight. By the time she slipped back through the wire at Chapman, the sun was high and unforgiving. People stared. She felt it immediately. Not admiration, not celebration. Recalibration. Operators who had dismissed her hours earlier now watched her with quiet attention. Conversations paused as she passed. Someone nodded. Someone else stepped aside to give her room. Reese kept walking. Recognition felt strange, heavy, unearned somehow. She hadn't done this for approval. She hadn't done it for respect. She had done it because waiting had been worse. Inside the intelligence section, she set her rifle down carefully, as if it might bruise from being treated roughly. Only then did she realize how tired she was. Bone deep. The kind of exhaustion that sleep didn't fix. She stood there for a long moment, unsure what came next. A knock broke the stillness. Sullivan Barrett stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Dust streaked his face. His eyes were bright, unsettled. "You saved us," he said simply. Reese exhaled through her nose. "I did my job." Barrett shook his head slowly. "No, you did what nobody else would." He told her about the drone footage, about the playback Briggs had watched in silence, about how close the point man had been seconds, not meters, from walking into overlapping fields of fire. "Jag cleared it," Barrett said. "By the book, defensive engagement. You stopped an imminent loss of friendly forces." "And the order I disobeyed?" Reese asked quietly. Barrett smiled faintly. "Hard to punish someone for saving your entire team." He handed her a small leather case. Inside lay a brass challenge coin, its trident catching the fluorescent light. "He wanted you to have it." The weight of the coin surprised her, not physically, but symbolically. It wasn't a medal. It didn't change her MOS or rewrite policy. It didn't undo the years of being overlooked. But it meant she had been seen. After Barrett left, Reese sat alone with the coin resting in her palm. She thought about how many doors it didn't open, and how much it still mattered. The briefing later that afternoon felt different from the moment she walked in. The chairs weren't arranged in rigid rows. The room wasn't buzzing with bravado. When Briggs told her to take the front seat, she did, slowly, deliberately. The footage played on the screen, grainy but undeniable, her position on the ridge, the first 3 shots. The point man froze in mid-stride seconds from the kill zone. When Briggs spoke, his voice didn't carry command. It carried admission. "I was wrong," he said. The words landed hard. Not because they were loud, but because they were rare. He named the mistakes, the ignored warnings, the assumptions. He didn't soften them. He didn't deflect responsibility. Reese listened without expression, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't under fire. This was harder. When he extended his hand and apologized, she stood and shook it. Not because it fixed anything, but because acknowledgement mattered. After the room emptied, Colton Marsh approached her, young, pale, alive. He pressed an old challenge coin into her hand, his father's. "My mom would have wanted you to have it," he said. Reese didn't trust herself to speak. She simply nodded. That evening, she climbed onto the roof of the intelligence section as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The air cooled. The call to prayer drifted faintly from the valley. Sullivan Barrett joined her without asking. They didn't talk at first. Eventually, he said, "First time stays with you." She knew what he meant. "I feel empty," she admitted. Not proud, not broken, just altered. Barrett nodded. "That's how it starts." She told him about her grandfather, about Montana, about promises whispered into hospital rooms. He said, "Every life you take carves something out of you," she said softly. "That the trick is making sure what you lose is worth what you save." Barrett looked out over the darkening horizon. Sounds like a man who knew the cost. Reese watched the stars emerge, one by one. She had taken the shots nobody expected. But now she understood something deeper. The real burden didn't come from defying orders or proving capability. It came from carrying the quiet knowledge that your competence had changed the shape of the world, irreversibly. And tomorrow, no matter what recognition followed, she would wake up with that knowledge still inside her. Heavy, permanent, and entirely her own. Why did the quiet afterward feel heavier than the firefight itself? Reese Callahan woke before dawn without remembering falling asleep. The thin mattress beneath her hadn't mattered. Neither had the silence of the barracks. Her body had shut down out of necessity, not comfort, and now it pulled her back into consciousness with the same blunt efficiency. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the weight returned. The ridge. The shots. the valley frozen in her scope. She lay still, staring at the dark ceiling, counting breaths the way her grandfather had taught her, slow, deliberate grounding. Outside, Chapman was already coming alive. Boots on gravel, engines turning over, men preparing for the next thing because there was always a next thing. Nothing about yesterday had stopped the war. That realization settled into her chest with a dull ache. When she stepped into the operations center later that morning, conversations shifted. Not stopped, shifted. Voices lowered. Eyes followed her in a way they hadn't before. Reese felt the attention like pressure against her skin. She didn't like it. Visibility had never felt safe. She took her seat at the intelligence desk and opened her laptop, grateful for the familiar language of data, terrain models, weather forecasts, pattern analysis. Numbers didn't stare back at you. They didn't ask you how it felt to end lives before breakfast. Briggs entered an hour later. He didn't announce himself. He didn't command the room. He stood near the doorway for a moment, watching his team work, watching Reese type. "Walk with me," he said. Not an order, not quite a request. They moved outside, away from the noise. The mountains loomed in the distance, indifferent witnesses to every conversation that ever mattered. Briggs stopped near the edge of the compound, hands resting on his hips. He looked older in daylight, tired in a way that rank didn't hide. "I watched the footage again this morning," he said. Reese waited. "I've been doing this for 2 decades," he continued. "I trust my instincts. I trust experience. Yesterday proved something I don't like admitting." She still said nothing. "That experience can calcify," he said quietly. "Turn into arrogance if you're not careful." Reese met his gaze then, not confrontational, just present. "I ignored you," Briggs said. "And if you hadn't disobeyed me, I'd be writing letters instead of after-action reports." There it was. The truth without armor. "I won't insult you by pretending an apology fixes that," he added. "But I need you to know I see it now." Reese nodded once. "That's enough." Briggs studied her face, perhaps looking for anger or satisfaction. He found neither. "Jag approved your actions," he said, "and I pushed through paperwork last night. Temporary attachment, Overwatch role, official." The words landed softly but carried weight. Reese felt something twist inside her, not excitement, apprehension. "Understood," she said. He hesitated. "There will be pushback." "I know. From people higher than me." "I know." Briggs exhaled slowly. "You should also know I won't let this get buried." She believed him. That afternoon, Reese found herself back in the same briefing room where she'd been dismissed only a day earlier. The chairs were fuller this time, the air more attentive. Operators leaned forward when she spoke, asked questions, took notes. She walked them through terrain overlays and wind behavior with the same calm precision she'd always used. Only now, people listened. It felt wrong. Not the listening, the suddenness of it. Afterward, Barrett caught up with her near the exit. "You okay?" She considered lying, considered shrugging it off. "I don't know," she said instead. He nodded. "That's honest." They walked in silence for a while. Then Barrett said, "They're talking about your shot, the last one." Reese stopped. "They shouldn't." "It's already happening." She closed her eyes briefly. "That's not why I did it." "I know," Barrett said, "but people need stories. They need something clean to wrap around chaos." And this wasn't clean. "No," he agreed, "it never is." That night Reese sat alone again, the 2 challenge coins resting side by side on the desk. She turned them over slowly, one newly given, one worn smooth by another life, another war. They didn't feel like trophies. They felt like responsibility. She thought about Colton Marsh, about the way his hands had shaken when he pressed the coin into her palm, about how close he'd come to not existing beyond that valley. That was the part no report captured. Sleep came in fragments, dreams filled with wind and distance, and the sound of her rifle echoing too long after the trigger pull. When she woke, there was a message waiting. Her name, a meeting time, command level. The walk to the conference room felt longer than it should have. Inside, the air was cooler, filtered, different from the grit of the operations floor. 3 officers sat at the table, one of them unfamiliar, higher rank, eyes sharp with evaluation. They asked questions about her training, about her decisions, about her willingness to disobey orders. Reese answered plainly, no embellishment, no defensiveness. I assessed imminent threat, she said. I acted to prevent loss of friendly life. And if you've been wrong, one of them asked. I wasn't, she replied evenly. The silence stretched. Finally, the unfamiliar officer spoke. Confidence like that makes people uncomfortable. Reese met his gaze. So does being wrong. Something like a smile flickered across his face. The meeting ended without ceremony. No promises, no warnings, just the sense of a door left slightly ajar. Outside, Reese let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Change didn't arrive loudly. It crept. Over the next days, requests came in, teams asking for her input, wind calls, terrain reads. She moved between roles fluidly, careful not to overstep, unwilling to shrink. She was visible now, and that terrified her more than the climb had. Visibility meant expectations. Expectations meant pressure. Pressure meant mistakes carried a heavier price. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the mountains, Reese found herself standing at the edge of the compound again, the same place Briggs had stood days earlier. She thought about her grandfather, about how he'd never talked about medals, only responsibility. Skill doesn't make you special, he'd said once. It makes you accountable. She understood that now. What she'd proven on the ridge wasn't that she was exceptional. It was that she could no longer pretend to be invisible. And invisibility, she was realizing, had protected her in ways she'd never appreciated. As darkness settled over Chapman, Reese accepted something she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. The shots she took had changed more than the outcome of a mission. They had changed the trajectory of her life. And from here on out, there would be no going back to silence. Only the harder work of carrying forward, steady, unseen when possible, unflinching when necessary, the weight of being trusted. Sometimes, proving yourself wasn't a single moment on a distant ridge. Sometimes, it was waking up every day afterward and choosing to keep standing where people could see you. Why did the opportunity she'd fought for feel more dangerous than the ridge ever had? The message came just after midnight. Reese Callahan stared at the screen longer than she needed to, reading the same line again and again, as if repetition might soften it. Nomination approved. Special Operations Target Interdiction Course. Fort Bragg. This was the door everyone told her didn't exist. And instead of relief, her stomach tightened. She sat alone in the intelligence section, the hum of equipment filling the silence, and felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. Not pride, not excitement. Expectation. On the ridge, the variables had been honest. Wind, distance, gravity. You did the math, trusted the process, accepted the result. This was different. This was people. The next morning, Briggs called her into the operations center. No audience, no posture, just 2 chairs and the truth sitting heavy between them. You don't have to take it, he said. Reese blinked. That's not how this works. It should be, Briggs replied. What you did out there opened a lot of eyes. It also stepped on a lot of toes. She nodded. I figured. They're going to test you, he continued. Not just your shooting, your patience, your restraint. Every mistake you make will confirm something they already believe. And every success will be explained away. Reese exhaled slowly. She lived inside that equation most of her life. I'm not asking if you're capable, Briggs said. I'm asking if you're willing to carry the cost. She thought about the ridge, about the moment she'd known there was no safe choice, only the right one. I already am, she said. Word spread fast after that. Some congratulated her quietly. Others avoided her altogether. A few tested her with offhand remarks disguised as humor. Guess intelligence analysts shoot now. Reese didn't respond. She had learned that not every challenge deserved oxygen. The days leading up to her departure blurred together. She continued her work as if nothing had changed: terrain analysis, mission prep, wind modeling, the same discipline, the same precision. But something had shifted beneath the surface. People waited when she spoke. Listened. That trust felt heavier than the rifle ever had. On her last night at Chapman, Reese returned to the roof one final time. The coin sat in her pocket, warm against her palm. Below her, the base pulsed with routine, briefings, laughter, exhaustion. The war continuing without pause. Barrett joined her again, offering the flask without a word. Montana, he asked. She nodded and took a small sip. The burn grounded her. You ever wonder, he said after a while, how many people don't get this moment, the chance to move forward instead of just surviving? All the time, Reese replied. That's why you hesitate, Barrett said gently. Not because you're scared of failing, because you know success doesn't mean peace. She watched the stars emerge. It just means different responsibilities. Exactly. He stood after a while, leaving her alone with the quiet. Sleep came easier that night, though her dreams were crowded. Not with gunfire, but with faces she couldn't place and paths splitting in too many directions. The flight out was early. As the aircraft lifted, Reese watched the base shrink beneath her. The ridge disappeared into the horizon, a place that would always exist in her memory, frozen in sharp clarity. At Fort Bragg, anonymity vanished fast. Eyes followed her, whispers trailed behind, some curious, some skeptical, some already dismissive. She recognized the posture immediately. Evaluation disguised as indifference. The course was brutal by design. Endless physical strain, mental pressure layered on exhaustion, instructors who didn't care about reputation, only results. The first week broke people. Reese endured. She didn't dominate, she didn't seek attention. She simply performed, consistent, precise, unflinching. During a long-range exercise, shifting winds punished overconfidence. Shots missed. Frustration flared. Reese waited. She watched the environment the way she always had. Let patterns emerge instead of forcing outcomes. When she finally fired, the round landed true. No celebration, no acknowledgement. Just a checkmark on a board. That night, one of the instructors stopped beside her as she cleaned her rifle. You learned this somewhere else, he said. Yes, sir. Not here. No, sir. He nodded once. Good, don't let us unteach you. The days bled into weeks, tests layered onto tests, every failure magnified, every success minimized. She overheard it once, not meant for her ears. She's good for now. Reese didn't flinch. She remembered her grandfather's voice, steady, patient. Don't chase the shot, let it come to you. During the final evaluation, conditions turned ugly. Wind erratic, visibility poor, targets placed at ranges that punished hesitation. Others rushed. Reese didn't. She breathed calculated, waited. Her final shot cut through uncertainty with quiet authority. When it was over, she felt nothing dramatic, no release, no triumph. Just completion. The debrief was short. You passed, the instructor said. No smile, no ceremony. Outside, Reese sat alone for a long time, letting the reality settle. She hadn't broken barriers. She had endured them. That was the difference. Weeks later, back in uniform, she received her new assignment. The language was careful, conservative, support role officially. Unofficially, everything had changed. When she returned to operational spaces, people didn't ask what she did. They asked what she saw. One evening, standing alone again beneath a foreign sky, Reese reflected on how far she'd come, not in distance, but in acceptance. Not theirs. Her own. She no longer needed permission to trust her instincts. She no longer needed silence as armor. What she carried now was quieter and heavier. The understanding that capability wasn't a destination. It was a responsibility renewed every day. And tomorrow, when another call came, another ridge, another impossible angle, she would answer it the same way she always had. Calmly, deliberately. Because strength, she had learned, wasn't proven in the moment everyone watched. It was proven in the long stretch afterward, when the echoes faded, and you chose to keep going anyway. Why did the quiet at the end feel louder than any command she had ever heard? Reese Callahan noticed it first in the pauses. The half-second of silence before a briefing continued. The way conversations shifted when she entered a room, not stopping, just adjusting like a river bending around stone. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had learned where to lean. Her new role didn't come with ceremony. No speeches, no photographs, just updated orders, a different access list, and an unspoken understanding that when things became uncertain, someone would look to her. That knowledge sat heavier than any pack she'd carried. On her first operation back in theater, she wasn't the focal point. She wasn't meant to be. She worked from the margins, studying terrain models and wind charts while others checked weapons and rehearsed movement. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, people wrote things down. The mission unfolded cleanly. No ambush, no unexpected contact, no radio voices breaking into panic. Success, she was learning, was often invisible. Afterward, no one congratulated her. No one needed to. The absence of casualties said everything. That night, Reese stood alone at the edge of the compound, watching dust settle into darkness. The stars overhead looked sharper here, farther from cities and certainty. She thought about how many moments like this she'd seen now, different valleys, different skis, the same quiet afterward. She wondered if her grandfather had felt this way. He had never talked about legacy, only about carrying forward what mattered and letting the rest fall away. At the time, she'd thought he meant technique, skill, discipline. Now she understood he'd meant something else entirely. Weeks passed, then months. Missions came and went, some loud, some quiet, some that stayed with her longer than others. Reese learned how to carry them, not neatly, not cleanly, but honestly. She didn't pretend the weight wasn't there. She just refused to let it harden her. That became her private discipline. One evening, she found herself back on a ridge not unlike the first one. Different country, different war, same thin air and restless wind. She lay prone behind the rifle, eyes moving slowly across the landscape. Nothing moved. She waited anyway. A younger operator lay beside her, watching the horizon with the rigid focus of someone still proving something. After a while, he whispered, "How do you know when it's time?" Reese didn't answer immediately. She watched the wind indicators, the way dust lifted and settled, the way shadows lengthened. "You don't," she said finally. "You just know when it's wrong not to." The operator nodded, absorbing the words like a rule he didn't yet know how to apply. They never took a shot that night, and that, Reese knew, was its own kind of success. Later, back at base, Briggs, older now, slower in his movements, found her reviewing imagery. He didn't comment on the maps. "I wanted you to know," he said. "They use your assessments as examples now, training material. Reese looked up. They don't need my name on them. Briggs smiled faintly. No, they don't. He hesitated, then added, I wish I'd learned earlier what you taught me. Reese closed the folder. You learned when it mattered. That night she dreamed of Montana. Snow on the ground, the sound of breath in cold air, her grandfather's hand steady on her shoulder, his voice calm and unhurried. She woke before the dream could fade, heart full in a way that surprised her. Years later, when people spoke about Reese Callahan, they rarely got the details right. Stories sharpened her into something cleaner than she had ever been. A symbol, a first, a name attached to moments larger than one person could ever hold. She let the stories exist. They weren't for her. What mattered happened in smaller spaces, in briefings where someone paused and reconsidered, in patrols that rerouted before danger could unfold, in lives that continued uninterrupted because someone had been patient enough to wait, humble enough to listen. On her last day in that unit, Reese packed her gear slowly. No rush, no ceremony. She left the challenge coins on the desk for a moment, then tucked them into her pocket where they had always belonged, out of sight, close to the heart. As she stepped outside, the sun was just beginning to rise. The mountains in the distance caught the light and held it, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. She stood there longer than necessary, breathing it in. She thought about the girl she had been once, quiet at the back of a room, holding truths no one wanted to hear. About the woman she had become, not louder, not harder, just more willing to stand where the light fell. Strength, she had learned, wasn't about being seen. It was about being ready. Ready to speak when silence would kill. Ready to wait when action would only satisfy ego. Ready to carry the weight without demanding recognition for it. As Reese Callahan turned and walked back into the world she had chosen, she understood something that had taken years to crystallize. Sometimes courage doesn't charge forward. Sometimes it doesn't raise its voice at all. Sometimes dignity doesn't explain itself. It simply acts.